Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Jar of Marble dwellers and Jar of Marble curious. My name is Linda and this is my podcast, Jar of Marbles. I hope that you've had a great day. It's been a very exciting week. We've had lots of rain, and I like rain because I've put lots of seeds in the garden, which means rain kind of guarantees success. Well, that's how it seems to go for me, and I'm always very happy about that. This week, I was just wanting to have a little talk about Circa 1975. Most people don't consider 60 to be a young age, but when you hit 75, you'd love to rewind to 60 and regain those years, right? This is one of the beliefs I think that motivated me to get going with this podcast and to keep me ever interested in what's next, to create something from scratch, something that was free of obligation and agendas. Few people would describe being 30 as your youth, but when you hit your mid-50s, your mid-30s will seem like the very young you. Anyway, moving on, I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming by again. It's always great to see you. So circa 1975, let's go. In 1975, I was 13, and I recall thinking that I was getting older now. I started high school, and I had always thought that high school people were real life adults, and I thought they were actually quite old. Today is a great opportunity. No matter how old you are, looking back in a few years today will seem like a time when you were young and full of potential, or that moment you could have started something, or a turning point that had appeared for you to make a choice that benefited your future. The moment right in front of you is a good one. Make the most of it. I remember 1975, I was thinking about making money. As I had just scored a job working at the back of a takeaway food shop called the Golden Grill. This is over in New Zealand. It was open until the wee hours where truckers could always get a feed. And the owners were so kind to me, and I worked hard for them, and they really paid me well. And so I was the chief onion peeler. In big buckets, I would sit outside and peel for hours as well as clean in the kitchen. And they used to say that I was too thorough. Being paid regularly meant I had a lot of freedom to buy the clothes I wanted as opposed to what was being bought for me, and I could also save money. They tried me at waitressing, but on my very first attempt, a man had said something inappropriate to me. Went right over my head, but the boss wasn't going to be having it and said that I would just have to, stick to my onions for now. I think he was genuinely feeling sad for me that I was somehow disappointed, but I wasn't disappointed. I didn't care. It didn't bother me once at all, not one bit. But I do remember all sorts of different conversations that they would have in the kitchen, because I believe they had a fishing boat, and they would be talking about what fish they were expecting to get or what they got, and it was just conversations that just were not anything that I'd ever heard about. But I also heard a lot of talk about Chinese horoscopes and the years and what different years represented different animals, and being talked about in the kitchen a lot and really enthusiastically, and I never forgot it. So that led me to look at what was the Chinese year for 1975. So the Chinese horoscope for 1975 was rabbit. The rabbit is the 4th and the 12th year cycle of animals that appear in the Chinese zodiac, related to the Chinese calendar. In fact, the year of the rabbit will appear again as part of the cycle next year, 22nd of January 2023 through to 9th of February 2024. So meanwhile, back in the jungle, 2022 is a lucky year and a good year for the rabbit. But this year, 2022, is the year of the tiger. I don't know if any of this means anything, to anybody out there. And if it does, great. Individuals who are born in the year of the rabbit can get lucky in life. Being born between 1965 and 1986 makes you the X generation. I come under the label of baby boomers, circa 1946 to 1964. Generation X, as mentioned above, circa 1965 to 1985. Millennial generation, that's circa 1985 to 2000. Then there's the Gen X, which is my granddaughter and grandson, because they were post-millennials, which is 2001 through to 2020. In 1975, that was my first year at high school in New Zealand, and Mark Williams was the king of the local pop scene with his number one hit, Yesterday Was Just the Beginning of My Life. What an awesome song. It's one of those songs when you hear it just straight away, you feel good. New Zealand's second television channel had begun broadcasting. Up until then, we only ever just had one TV channel called Channel 1. I know. The first TV show I ever saw was Star Trek, and it started its screening in New Zealand in 1964, and it was an episode about holograms. It was a mind-blowing experience for me as a 6-year-old. Close to home, Australians' version of Neighbours started screening in 1975 in New Zealand and ended in 1983. TV2 started, as I said, our second TV channel in 1975. Its first fundraising telethon, it actually raised $500,000 for St. John Ambulance. I know. And let's see, who was in government in Australia at that time was Malcolm Fraser, and he'd been commissioned as caretaker Prime Minister following the dismissal of Gough Whitlam's three-year-old Labor government by Governor-General Sir John Kerr on the 11th of November 1975. Who was in government in New Zealand in 1975? Well, that was Norman Kirk, was the Labor Prime Minister from the 1972 election until his death in August 1974. I had to mention him because I really liked him. He was replaced by Wallace Bill Rowling. I cried when Norman Kirk died. He was only 51. There was such an outcry of sadness when he died. Robert Muldoon was ultimately voted in 1975, the New Zealand National Party. He was known for his quotes, one of which was, "New Zealanders who immigrate to Australia raise the IQ..." My goodness, raise the IQ for both countries. Bit of a cheeky sod, I always thought. What major events happened in 1975? See, there's a list of 1975 major news events in history. The Vietnam War ends as communist forces take Saigon and South Vietnam surrenders unconditionally. Sony introduces Betamax videotapes, and Matsushita /JVC introduced VHS. Do you remember that? I do. And one of the very first blockbuster films, Jaws, is released during June of 1975. So I remember seeing Jaws at the movies in New Zealand. For me, the scariest scene in Jaws when Hooper and Chief Brody go out to look for the shark and find Ben Gardner's boat. And when Hooper dives to examine the hull, the part when the head bobbled out, I stood up from my seat and let out a blood-curdling scream, and then slowly, sat back down and resumed watching the rest behind my hands. Did you know the shark scenes were filmed in a pool? So Spielberg recruited a small crew and shot the scene in the film editor Werner Field's backyard swimming pool in Encino, California. And to make the clear chlorinated water match the murkier look of the ocean, crew members poured in a gallon of milk into the pool. I know. How interesting. I don't think I ever forgot that feeling of fear, except possibly the Poseidon Adventure. That came out in 1972, and my goodness, that was just so frightening. 1975 was my first year of high school at an all-girls high school, and my first day kind of set the tone. As we all gathered into the large hall to be welcomed to the high school, our names were read out and our teachers would then take us to our rooms to then start organising our schedules for classes moving forward. This was a big deal, different teachers for different subjects. One by one, all the names were called until the hall was completely empty, except for me. I was the only one remaining. It was a really big hall too. I was ushered up to the stage where the only remaining teacher stood looking down at me from the stage and asked me who I was and asked me if I was expected at another school, to which I said no. Long story short, had been expected at another college that I never applied for. In fact, I was given a choice at that moment. Would I rather go to that college? Which no, given I was in full uniform, I was staying there. The school motto was Scientia Protesta Est. I looked up the correct pronunciation and it is a mega fail, so I know. So excuse my Latin. That was really bad. Oh, no, thank you. I'll just say thank you. Knowledge is power. For me, school was fun and was music. That was all I was interested in, and I have no regrets about my school days. No point really anyway, right? Right. My first year of high school, I was so keen and was enjoying it so much. But by the following year, I had a boyfriend and school became a thorn in my side. I didn't hate it, but I loved English and music and drama, and that was awesome. So, which brings me to music in 1975. Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille. Oh, I love that song. Rhinestone Cowboy, Glenn Campbell. You couldn't help but sort of know the words. Jive Talking by the Bee Gees. Mamma Mia by ABBA. Sailing by Rod Stewart. Amazing times. Let's Do It Again by the Staple Sisters. Sweet Love by the Commodores. Boogie Fever. Oh, so good. Have a Cigar, Pink Floyd, James Taylor with How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, The Hustle by Dan McCoy, Feel Like Making Love by Bad Company. I mean, that was fairly outrageous. Evil Woman by Electric Light Orchestra, and Gloria, Patti Smith, TNT, AC/DC. Elton John with Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Lovely song. Lovers, The Drug by Roxy Music and more. But I was quite surprised by the artists that released music in that year of 1975. Had a bit of a gaze at movies. 1975, there might be no better definition of cult classic than the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Even if you know nothing about the film, you're probably familiar with it as that movie where people cross-dress and throw things at the screen. If you are a big fan, well, there's probably a good chance you've put on your favourite corset, gone to a midnight showing and done the time warp with dozens of other like-minded fans. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Nicholson. Many of the scenes in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest were shot without the actor's knowledge. To complete realistic immersion, director Foreman led his performers in unscripted group therapy sessions in which he directed the actors to develop their characters' psychological maladies organically. He would often capture footage of the actors both in and out of character without explicitly mentioning that the cameras were rolling. And what about Monty Python and the Holy Grail? The name of the highly influential comedy troupe made up of Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, Terry Jones and Michael Palin were made up by the group where they were commissioned to make their BBC comedy show Monty Python's Flying Circus. So for the fans out there that are well versed in Monty Python's Flying Circus, the coconut joke came out of necessity. The running joke of the knights riding round on invisible horses with the sound of the horses' hooves, clopping around from their squires, clapping coconuts together, came from the fact that the group didn't have enough money in the budget to afford actual horses. The group came up with the coconut idea from an old BBC radio practice of using coconut halves as sound effects for horses. That was brilliant. I love stuff like that. It's so interesting, isn't it? Dog Day Afternoon, Al Pacino. The stranger-than-fiction true crime story about three men attempting to rob a bank during broad daylight in the dead of summer in New York, only to become a grueling 14-hour hostage situation and high-profile media circus, will forever live in infamy due to how incredibly outlandish the details are. And the very talented Bob Hope hosted the 47th Academy Awards in 1975, co-host with Shirley MacLaine, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. With 19 appearances as host or co-host, the comedian was the most popular Oscar host for several decades and earned an unprecedented 5 honorary Oscars for his service to the film industry. It's quite impressive, isn't it? I know. The Godfather, Best Supporting Actor. Obviously, we're still in 1975. Of course, it's because it's all about 1975. Robert De Niro, and 4 other awards from Best Production Design to Original Music Score, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. I love The Godfather. never seen it actually. I always found it a bit too gory and scary for me. I know this because I watched enough under the blanket. Well, I was sort of on top of the blanket, but then I hid under the blanket. Oh, for God's sake, you know what I mean. The Great Gatsby, The Towering Inferno. In 1975, an average house in Australia was around $28,000. That same house now would be at least minimum $850,000, which by today's standards is approximately 30 times more expensive. The average wage was $7,600 per year. 4,063 billion was the world population, and we're now close to 8 billion. I just love how they know this. They go around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 25, 26, 6,942. Yep, okay. I know they have their ways, but still. So much productivity in 1975. Charles Richards said of productivity, "Don't be fooled by the calendar. There are only as many days in the year as you make use of. One person gets only a week's value out of a year while another gets a full year's value out of a week." And it can really be like that sometimes, can't it? Like today, for example, I met 2 really great people, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. You know, just now and then you bump into people and you have the rarest of experiences where you just click. And I wish it happened more, but it doesn't. But I'm just saying, you know, I feel like I got many years' value out of today. So here's a question for you. Which is one previous habit you had that you'd like to bring to life, to reclaim? Which then begs the question, what is one current habit that you'd like to let go? I find that really, really interesting because, you know, when I reflect on things I used to do or how I used to do things, say 20, 30 years ago, and a lot of what I did was not so much thoughtlessly, but I would just go for things and I was never scared. And it wasn't like I was doing stupid things. You know, it was usually in business, or I'd give, you know, singing somewhere or go, or I'd create something. And I think I do like to toil the soil of my brain, and my world looking for that, you know, occasional unearthing of something wonderful, turning things inside out to see why or what else it could be, or is it so terrible? It's having an active mind, and that feeling of discovery is just scintillating, hence why another reason to have a podcast, that everlasting hope that there's others who, just like me, like to think about and know interesting stuff. Stuff! It's the people too, Bob. Some people have a way of making anything sound interesting. You know, you've spoken to different people and I think, oh my God, they could talk about potatoes and I would just find this endlessly interesting. 1975, Margaret Thatcher was the first woman to be elected to lead Britain's Conservative Party. Egypt reopens the Suez Canal after 8 years. President of America is Gerald R. Ford. Billie Jean King wins 6th Wimbledon crown and retires from singles. 1975 is the beginning of Rubik Cubes and mood rings and pet rocks. Bell bottoms, hip huggers and the fabulous leisure suit. Leisure suits were like... Let's just keep it to interesting, shall we, Bob? Disco was born. Yeah, well, I love me a bit of disco. In 1975, computer hobbyists Stephen Wozniak and Stephen Jobs, begin working on computer designs. Together they developed the Apple I prototype. While it wasn't in 1975, I think it is interesting to mention that the metric system was introduced to New Zealand in 1976. I recall the fumbling and bumbling at school as clearly the teachers were having to catch up and learn the change from the imperial system that had been familiar and understood by all of us. I remember not so fondly the introduction as I was already in my second year of high school. So yeah, that was just a big old no from me. It had been introduced to Australia in 1974. In 1975, divorce numbers were growing very quickly. In the 1970s, the sexual revolution too fueled the marital tumult of the times. Spouses found it easier in the swinging 70s. I just love how they've called it the swinging 70s. It's like they invented all that swinging stuff. Anyway, don't get me started. To find extramarital partners and came to have higher and often unrealistic expectations of their marital relationships. Thank goodness we have far more realistic expectations now. No? Okay then. Divorce rates greatly increased, and many kids who had parents marrying during that decade, I was going to say dickhead, I don't know where they came from, experienced seeing their parents separate. 1970 was a decade where divorce became common and people took it as a norm among families. I can tell you right now that is just not true. I was reading that and it was someone's idea of, like it was probably starting to become more normal. My parents did that in the 1970s and I'm telling you that was not my experience. That was very much a no. That was frowned upon. As the years progressed, people did divorce more, of course, and the court favoured divorce more. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, I've got to control myself here. My parents separated in the late 1970s and it was very much still a stigma. I recall being in shock, and I was 18 years old when my father declared he couldn't take it anymore. And being a known womanizer, it would have been very inconvenient for him to having to come home to a wife of 24 years and 4 children. Come on, look, it would have been hard for him. And then coming home to not doing any housework or helping out in any way, So, it must have been just overwhelming for him, poor man, and was leaving. And boy, did he. We never saw him for over 6 months initially and then rarely. I was in shock, not that he was divorcing us, but because, let's be clear, it wasn't just that he left my mother, he left all of us. I had 3 siblings. I was dreading having to tell anyone that my parental units were divorcing because it was simply not done. It was quite awful and a burden that I didn't want to bear it, let alone process it. It was the best thing for my mother, obviously, ultimately, as she had been having to put up with him screwing around on her for years. And I know for a fact because I actually saw it with my own eyes. And let me tell you, I would very much like to be able to unsee that. Anywho, that is the beauty of getting so much older and having clear perspectives where you can look back on things and now not really an emotion attached to it. It's kind of comedic actually, and it's just facts. I look back on the year of 1975 and as I was researching the music and movies and just life as I was experiencing it at the time, and statistically speaking, I honestly would have needed 2 hours at least to, really give you everything that, was going on at that time. So I had to randomly select different bands and little tidbits here and there. For me, 1975 was a time of a lot of freedom. I felt like the sun was shining all the time. I loved being a young girl growing up. I just remember I had great friends. I was singing a lot. It's lovely to say I have the best memories of 1975. I hope that you have great memories of 1975. And if you hadn't been born then you probably won't have any memories of 1975. But I just sort of thought I'd just, let you know that just in case you didn't know that, Anyway. Oh, that's just ridiculous. I know, but, I don't mind a little bit of ridiculous now and then, Bob. I like it. It's what you fight the ding-dongs with, a little ridiculousness, a smile and a giggle. Anyway, it looks like we're coming to the end of yet another podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have making it. Oh, crikey, life's good. Thanks, as always, for passing by. Say g'day to the family for me and the pussycat, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye.